Hello and welcome back to the Barbara Thompson podcast. I'm your host, Barbara. I'm a therapist and founder of Self Care Studio. Firstly, I want to say thank you so much for choosing to spend some time with me today. I never take it for granted that you press play. Life is busy and there's a million podcasts out there. So thank you for allowing me into your day. Now, I don't know where you're listening from today. Maybe you're driving to work. Maybe you're out walking the dog. Or maybe you're sitting in your car because it's the only 5 minutes of peace you've had all day. Or maybe you've intentionally searched for this podcast because somewhere deep down you've been wondering, why don't I feel good enough? And if that's you, I'm really glad you're here because today's conversation isn't about teaching you to think positively. It's not about looking in the mirror every morning and saying, I'm amazing. It's not about pretending everything's okay when it isn't. It's about something so much deeper than that, our self-worth. And honestly, I really believe that self-worth is one of the foundations of almost everything. And today in this episode, I am so proud to say that this is episode 160. So this is a very special episode for me as well, because I really believe that self-worth, it impacts the relationships that we choose and the boundaries that we set. I really think it also affects how we speak to ourselves and also whether we ask for help. I think it also relates to, and especially in relationships, like whether we settle, whether we stay way too long, and whether we believe that we deserve happiness, and who we align ourselves with, who we hang out with, and why, if we put ourselves last, why do we keep doing it? And over the last 4 years, if you've been listening to my podcast, for a while, you'll know I talk a lot about this, about the relationship that we have with ourselves. Because what I've learned after working with many clients and also with myself, the work that I've done on myself, the longest relationship that we ever have with anyone is with ourselves. And yet it's often the one that we neglect the most. So much so that people, when I ask them, and I was one of these people, what's the relationship like with yourself? I used to think, and I'm going to be brutally honest here, when people say, what's the relationship with yourself, I'd kind of roll my eyes and go, ugh. It would kind of give me the ick, and I'd be like, ooh, why do I want to have a relationship with myself? And that is so weird, and I don't even know what that looks like, and I don't even know what that feels like, but I would hear people talk about it. And in passing, and I would often think, that is such a weird thing. Like, you're yourself. Why would you have a relationship with yourself? And I couldn't connect the two together. Like, saying it out loud, I'm like, I could say to anyone, I have a relationship with myself and kind of bluff my way through things. But if I'm being really honest with you, I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know what that felt like. So, yeah, it kind of makes sense that we neglect ourselves and we always go, it doesn't matter. I'll look after myself. I don't want to be a burden on anyone else. I mean, it can come up in so many ways. I don't know if this helps you, but I thought I'd just be honest with how I was feeling at that time when I had a zero relationship with myself. There was not even on the radar. Can I ask you a question? Have you ever tried affirmations? And do you know what affirmations are? You know the ones, the things that it's like, I'm worthy, I'm confident, I love myself. And maybe you've written them on sticky notes, and maybe you've saved them on your phone wallpaper and repeated them every morning, hoping that one day it'll finally click. And if they've helped you, that's amazing, that's wonderful, and I love that. But for so many of us, and me included, and people that I work with, it doesn't really shift anything. In fact, sometimes it makes us feel worse because I'll hear people say to me, Barbara, I keep telling myself I'm enough, but I don't believe it. Or it may be something like, I know I'm supposed to love myself, but I just don't know how. And every single time I hear that, I think, of course you don't. Why would you? Not because there's something wrong with us, not because we're broken or we're failing, but our brain is doing, our masterful brain, this amazing thing that we have, is doing exactly what it's designed to do. Our brains collect evidence. Think about that. Imagine for a moment that I met you for a coffee every single Friday for the next 12 months. Okay, and every week I turned up, I was on time. Every week I turned up, I listened to you. Every week I remembered what was important to you. And I showed up exactly when I said I would. And eventually I think maybe you trust me. Not because I told you to, but because I'd earned it. And trust isn't built through words, it's built through repeated experiences. And I really think that self-worth works exactly the same way. And we often expect ourselves to believe something simply because we've said it. But our brains are quietly asking, okay, where's the evidence? Where's the proof? Another way of evidence is proof. And if your whole life you've experienced criticism like many of us have, things like rejection, bullying, feeling left out, growing up feeling like you had to earn love, feeling like you were too much, or maybe you didn't feel like you were enough, and your brain over those years has collected years of evidence or proof, sometimes even decades. So when you suddenly stand in front of the mirror and go, yeah, I'm worthy, your brain almost responds with, really? Since when? And not because it's trying to be a badass or it's trying to be cruel. It's actually trying to keep your internal story consistent, because we all have a story. And this is why I think so many of us give up on ourselves, because we think, affirmations don't work. It must be doing it wrong. No, I think we've been asking the wrong questions. Instead of asking, how do I convince myself I'm worthy? Maybe we need to ask, how do I start collecting new proof that I am, new evidence that I am? Because now we're no longer relying on motivation, we're relying on action. And I think that's where I think genuine self-worth is built. And one of the biggest myths I hear is that confident people wake up feeling confident. Oh my God, they're so confident, they're so lucky. But I honestly don't think that's true. I think confidence isn't something that you wake up with. I think it's a consequence. It's built through doing things that honor yourself. Every time you keep a promise to yourself. Every time you say no when you really want to, when you say no, when you actually really want to say no. Every time you leave a relationship that no longer feels healthy. Every time you have a difficult conversation instead of avoiding it. What about every time you choose rest instead of burning yourself into the ground? This is all proof. This is all evidence. And your brain starts noticing something different. Maybe, do I actually matter? Maybe I can trust myself. Maybe I'm becoming someone who has my own back. And can I tell you something? I think that's far more powerful than standing in front of the mirror saying I'm enough, while spending the rest of the day abandoning yourself, because that's confusing for our nervous system. And imagine telling your best friend every day, I've got you, I'll always be there, you matter. And then every single time they needed you, you cancelled, you ignored them, you talked badly about them, you chose everyone else first. Eventually, would your friend believe your words? Probably not. Because our actions always speak louder than our intentions. And I think the relationship that we have with ourselves is no different. And so if you've been struggling with self-worth lately, I want to suggest something. Stop asking yourself whether you feel worthy. Instead, ask yourself things like, what proof have I given myself this week that I matter? Or what evidence have I given myself this week that matters, if that lands better for you? And that question might just change things for you. So, if self-worth isn't built by positive thinking, what actually chips away at it? So there's a few different things that I see over again in my therapy room. I see different people, different ages, with different life experiences and different jobs. But so interesting because I see the same patterns. And I wonder if you might recognize one or two of these in yourself. So one of them is people pleasing. I can feel like some of you are shaking your head going, yep, Barbara's talking about me. Now, before you switch this off because you've heard people talk about people pleasing forever, I want you to stay with me because I don't think people pleasing is actually about being nice. I think it's about being safe and feeling safe. So for so many of us, growing up, we need to keep the peace because it became like a survival mechanism for us. So maybe there was conflict in our home growing up. Maybe someone we lived with was unpredictable. Maybe the love was conditional. Maybe we've learned that if everyone else is happy, then we're safe. But now as an adult, you say yes when every part of you wants to say no. You apologize for things that aren't your responsibility. Like, does that relate to you? Sometimes you're like, I'm sorry, even when you're just trying to ask a question for someone. Oh, I'm sorry, I have to ask you a question. That's quite automatic for a lot of us too. And with that, you may over-explain. You worry if someone is annoyed with you. You replay conversations in your head. You take responsibility for other people's actions and emotions. And here's the part that makes me a little sad. Every time that you abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable, your brain quietly collects this information. Here's another proof of evidence. My needs don't matter. Not because you're consciously thinking that, but because your actions are teaching your brain exactly that. Now imagine doing that every single day for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. No wonder self-worth feels shaky, and because you've unintentionally been practicing the opposite, that's why we do it. The second thing I see is people breaking promises to themselves, and this one is huge. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to keep a promise to someone else? And you wouldn't even dream of cancelling lunch with a friend without a really good reason. You'd show up, you'd be there, you make the effort. But when it comes to ourselves, it's like, I'll start on Monday. I'll go for the walk tomorrow. I'll book the appointment next week. I'll rest after I finish doing this. I'll look after myself once everyone else is okay. And tomorrow becomes next week, and then next week becomes next month, and eventually our brain notices. And you know what it notices? That we're reliable for everybody else, but not ourselves. The trust starts to disappear, not because we don't love ourselves, but because we haven't shown ourselves that we're dependable. And some clients tell me things like, I don't trust myself. And I'll ask them things like, well, what promises have you kept to yourself today? And usually there's like silence, and not because they think they've done anything wrong, it's because they've never thought about it that way. And maybe trusting yourself isn't something that we actually have. It's something that we have to build over time, like one promise at a time. Now, the third thing I want to share with you guys is, I say, our lovely friend comparison. Oh my goodness. The saying comparison steals so much joy, and I honestly think social media has made this harder than ever before. We're comparing our beginning to someone else's middle, their highlight reel to our behind the scenes, their confidence, their relationships, their holiday, their business, their body. And before we know it, we're measuring our worth against someone else's life. But I don't know, we all do it. It's common, right? But here's what I want you to remember. You have absolutely no idea what someone else's internal world looks like. And I sit with people every single day. From the outside, they're successful and confident and beautiful and funny and accomplished. And inside, they're carrying so much anxiety, self-doubt, loneliness, fear. They don't feel like they're good enough, which is why comparison is such a trap, because we're comparing your insides to someone else's outside. And it's really never going to be a fair comparison. Remember, people only show us what they want us to see on social media too. The fourth thing is not having any boundaries. So can I say something that might challenge you a little? So every boundary that you don't set is a lesson you're teaching someone else about how to treat you. So every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you answer work emails when you're exhausted, every time you tolerate disrespect, every time you let someone speak to you in a way that you wouldn't allow them to speak to your best friend, you're sending a message to yourself. This is what I deserve. Now, I know boundaries can feel really uncomfortable. Trust me, I absolutely get it. And sometimes people don't like our boundaries. So even when we're brave enough to put them in place, other people don't like them. And sometimes people pull away. Sometimes people are so disappointed in us. But can I ask you this? Is disappointing someone else always worse than disappointing yourself? Because for so many of us, it's exactly what we're doing. We're choosing temporary comfort over long-term self-respect. And every time we do this, our self-worth quietly just takes a back seat, then takes another back seat. And finally, the way we speak to ourselves is the fifth thing I wanted to mention. Imagine following someone around all day. And we're seeing like every mistake they make, you criticize them. You idiot. What's wrong with you? You're useless. You've ruined everything. You'll never change. How long do you think that person would want to spend time with you? I don't think they'd hang around very long, right? If you're berating them for that, saying all those things. Yet some of us spend years and years talking to ourselves exactly like that. And I often say to my clients, would you ever speak to your child like that? Or would you say that to your best friend? And the answer clearly always comes back as, oh my God, no. So why do we believe it's okay to speak to ourselves that way? And often our inner critic thinks it's protecting us, that if it keeps us small, we'll never fail, we'll never embarrass ourselves, we'll never get rejected. But all it really does is helps us to keep stuck and keeps us small. Because shame has never been a particularly good long-term motivator. Compassion, however, that's a little bit different. Compassion doesn't let us off the hook. Compassion says, I know this is hard. I know you're learning. I know you're a human, and I still believe in you. And that's a very different conversation to have with yourself. And maybe that's where we can begin. So if self-worth isn't built by positive thinking, what do we actually do? Because I never want you to finish one of my podcast episodes thinking, okay, Barbara, that all makes sense, but where do I even start? So I just want to keep this simple. I don't think we need to completely reinvent ourselves. I think we need to start collecting this thing that we've been talking about in this episode. We need to start collecting different evidence or proof. Remember earlier when I said our brain is constantly gathering evidence? Well, let's give it some new things to notice. The first one is keep one promise to yourself every single day. 1. Not 10, not 20, 1. Maybe we just got to start small here, guys. Maybe it's drinking enough water. Maybe it's going for a 10-minute walk. Maybe it's putting your phone down an hour before bed. Maybe it's finally making that doctor's appointment you've been putting off. Or maybe it's spending 10 minutes reading your book instead of scrolling. And at the moment, doesn't really matter what it is. What matters is that you're keeping your word to yourself. Because every single time that you do this, your brain notices and it says, okay, maybe I can trust myself. And that maybe sounds like a little tiny shift, but that little tiny shift and movement on repeat consistently creates enormous change. Maybe start noticing too when you're abandoning yourself. And we don't want to judge yourself or beat yourself up. We just want to be aware. So maybe you notice this week saying yes when you really want to say no. Maybe you laugh at a joke that actually hurt you. Maybe someone crosses a boundary and you still stay quiet. And maybe you agree with everyone else because you're scared of disappointing them. Instead of criticizing yourself, just notice it. Because curiosity creates change and judgment usually creates shame. And shame is what keeps us stuck. Another thing I want you to think about is start making decisions from self-respect instead of fear. So this one really changed my life. So whenever you're faced with a decision, ask yourself, what would the version of me who deeply respects herself would choose? Not what keeps everyone happy, not what everyone expects of me, what causes the least conflict, what do people expect from me to do, but what feels aligned with who you're becoming. Sometimes this will feel uncomfortable at first. That's okay because growth usually does. And discomfort doesn't automatically mean you're making the wrong decision. Sometimes it simply means that you're just doing something different. And I want you to remember this. Your worth has never been something that you've had to earn. It's something you've always had, and life just has a funny way of making us forget. Think about a newborn baby. Nobody looks at the little baby and says, you'll be worthy once you achieve enough. You'll be worthy once you lose weight. You'll be worthy once you're successful. And you'll be worthy once everyone likes you. No. They're worthy simply because they exist. And somewhere along the way, many of us stop believing that ourselves. Maybe because of something someone said or something that someone didn't say to us. Maybe because someone left. Maybe because we're bullied or we're always compared. Whatever our story is, I want you to hear this today. Your experiences may have shaped the way you see yourself, but they do not define your worth. And there's a really important difference here. And maybe this week isn't about trying to become worthy. Maybe it's simply about remembering who you already are. And today, before we finish, I'd love to leave you with one question. If you truly believed deep in your bones that you were enough exactly as you are, what would you do differently this week? Would you have that conversation? Would you apply for that job? Would you leave that relationship? Would you finally ask for help? Would you stop apologizing so much? Would you rest without feeling guilty? Would you take up a little more space? And just sit with that. You don't have to answer it today, but I promise it's worth thinking about. And if today's episode resonated with you, and if you found yourself nodding along, and if you recognized yourself in some of the things we spoke about, please know you don't have to work through this on your own. And this is exactly the kind of work I do every single day with my clients at Self Care Studio. And together we gently explore where these beliefs came from. It's not to blame anyone or to stay stuck in the past, but it's to really, truly understand your story with compassion so you can stop living from old beliefs that no longer serve you. And whether it's anxiety, people-pleasing, overthinking, low self-worth, burnout, relationships, or simply feeling like you've lost yourself, I'd love to help you. And you can find all the information about working with me in the show notes or head over to my website. And if you've been sitting on the fence about reaching out, maybe just today is the day that you send me a message. Sometimes one conversation really can change the direction of our lives. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If you've enjoyed today's episode, I'd be so grateful if you subscribe to the Barbara Thompson podcast. Leave a review or share this podcast or episode with someone that you care about. You never know who might need to hear these words today. Until next time, please be kind to yourself. You deserve the same compassion that you so freely give to everyone else. Take care, and I'll chat to you again very soon.